A century ago, in the midst of a world bracing for total war, Edgar Cayce turned his inner sight not to the battlefield, but to a subtle, invisible conflict yet to come. He saw the rise of a distinct figure, not a traditional king, but the champion of vibration, a man whose mere voice would shatter the collective calm. He was the emperor of iron and echo, a loud, consuming presence, a mirror reflecting the nation's deepest fissures. Cayce's warning was stark. This man would emerge not as a leader, but as the focal point of fracture. His power would be measured not by territory or military might, but by the sheer volume of attention he commanded. To his followers, he would be the unstoppable force, speaking truths that burned away politeness. To his detractors, he would be a grotesque aberration, a source of endless outrage. But Cayce insisted that this spectacle, this Donald Trump figure, was the result of long-term orchestration. The true masters, the alchemists of the narrative, would operate in the invisible spectrum of human emotion. They would steer history by cultivating the precise frequency of discord and self-doubt. They choose the moments of chaos, the symbols of allegiance, and the words that turn neighbor against neighbor. Every rally, every defiant statement, every tweet that ignites a firestorm, all of it is data, meticulously managed by minds the public never sees. And while the world is fixated on the gilded figure's performance, the hidden architects smile. The illusion of the lone ruler is their masterstroke. The world believes Donald Trump is running the country's show, but he is merely the perfectly tuned instrument of the deeper, darker resonance machine. The year was 1943. Cayce's trance transported him to a time when emotional scarcity would replace economic scarcity, and the nation's integrity would be tested by an unprecedented campaign of psychological warfare. In the vision, the seer observed the champion of vibration, a figure radiating a blinding, manufactured light. This was the aura of the perpetual trend, powered by instantaneous response loops. He stood not before banks or monuments, but at the nexus of the information cascade, where his words instantly fractured into millions of individualized echoes. Below him, the masses were not physically assembled, but connected in a vast, silent communion of screens. Their eyes were mesmerized, their convictions fiercely hardened. They perceived in him a bulwark against change, a force of raw, unapologetic will, capable of demolishing the established temples of decorum. But as Cayce's focus sharpened, the mesmerizing intensity of the champion began to fail. What looked like authentic raw power was merely engineered output, a light that was broadcast, not birthed. The champion's voice, the roaring, carried an inescapable, hollow echo, the soft hum of unseen scriptwriters of sentiment who framed every soundbite for maximum divisive impact. His aggression was absolute, his confidence unassailable, yet Cayce knew the fire was not internal. "He is the conductor of chaos," Cayce whispered, his voice heavy with revelation, but his baton is held by those who exist outside the map of celebrity. Around the iron and echo emperor, Cayce detected fine, silver-gray filaments of energy, like nerves made of pure frequency, reaching into the digital abyss. These filaments pulsed with life, transmitting complex, rapid instructions from the true central nervous system, the inner court of silence. They manipulated him like a synthetic golem. A strategic accusation here, a sudden, market-shaking policy there, a display of unpredictable temper perfected long before the press conference began. Behind the scenes, global media, social networks, and think tanks worked in concert, reifying his persona into the undeniable reality of the day. Cayce realized that the new chains were forged from data streams and narratives, invisible currents carrying division, fear, and manufactured nostalgia, pumped directly into the national psychic pool. "He is the golden vessel of discord," Cayce stated softly. Proud in his visibility, yet perfectly hollow. His influence is not self-generated, but the perfectly tailored reflection of those who built him in the deepest secrecy of the global financial matrix. The public saw either a messiah or a harbinger of doom. But Cayce saw an automaton of distraction, animated by powers that had consciously chosen the perpetual, profitable darkness over any light of accountability. And in the profound silence of the vision, as the collective attention was consumed by the champion's latest move, Cayce heard the chilling, unified thought of the alchemists. Let them believe he holds the hammer, while we shape the steel. The light around the champion dimmed entirely, and Cayce saw the devastating truth. The reflection in the digital stream was not his own face, but the blurred, cold-eyed image of the inner court, smiling in the hum of their server racks. A generation will arrive, the prophet lamented, when the illusion of total transparency will be their comfortable lie. The path of their disintegration will have already been paved with their own emotional responses. Cayce's mind then descended into the hidden chamber of the inner court of silence. It was not a physical location, but a nexus of consensus among faceless entities. They were cloaked not in robes, but in the absolute anonymity of sovereign wealth and untraceable digital transactions. They sat in a circle, surrounded by the true symbols of their power: patents, algorithms of engagement, private treaties, and the financial architecture of global debt, each pulsing with faint, calculating intent. They discussed not mere political alignments, but the ultimate control of cognitive capacity, resource allocation, and the sustained state of division. Their dialogue was a clinical, emotionless calculus, designed to encode thought rather than to communicate meaning. Each syllable was a weight placed upon the global scale, rippling through the corridors of power and the financial markets. They who dwell in the deep shade of ultimate financial power, Cayce murmured, will learn to rule, not through obvious oppression, but through the cultivation of ideological war. Cayce saw their invisible influence, like fine-spun wire, wrapping around entire continents, trapping nations in a web of economic dependence and narrative exhaustion. They had perfected the art of subliminal direction, guiding entire civilizations toward prescribed outcomes without ever leaving a fingerprint. The alchemists of the narrative had uncovered the secret to modern societal mastery. They needed no physical thrones, only the levers of influence. Their dominion was entirely neuro-linguistic, their empire utterly decentralized and omnipresent. They would feed the global conversation with manufactured outrage, label it patriotism, and observe as nations willingly tore apart their own social compacts. They would advise and finance both extremist wings of every conflict, ensuring maximum energy expenditure on internal battles. They would raise up champions, like Donald Trump, heroes and villains, all crafted from the same volatile social clay, all serving the same grand, unseen purpose: to perpetually distract the audience from the true cost of the spectacle. The champion of vibration would be their perfect thermal vent for social anxiety, a colossal symbol of polarization whose sole function was to divert scrutiny from the hands that held the purse strings. He would ascend by shattering norms, fall by his unmanageable ego, and in the consuming light of his collapse, the inner court would remain intact, unchallenged, perfectly silent. And Cayce, deeply shaken by the scale of the deceit, spoke softly. When truth becomes a weapon of tribal identity and freedom a profitable brand, then the fragmentation shall be complete. Only when the people quiet the noise within and activate their own internal compass will the grip of the alchemists begin to loosen. Cayce watched as society entered the age of perpetual conflict. Families, once bedrock, fractured by the toxicity of belief. Public spaces became mere echo chambers, silent with the fear of speaking the wrong code word. The most devastating tool was the weaponization of history, where the past was instantly rewritten to justify the emotional demands of the present. The moral foundation became a liquid asset. Facts were merely suggestions, and righteous anger became the most powerful, easily traded commodity. Media, academia, and social validation systems merged into one endless, dizzying flicker show of engineered reality, designed only to infuriate, validate, and isolate. The shadow of the champion of vibration covered every living room, every device, a phantom menace whose control was woven not from physical coercion, but from addictive patterns of neurological engagement. And the inevitable time shall arrive, Cayce warned, when the people will trust the algorithm more completely than the still, small voice of their own soul. They will frantically cheer the spectacular demolition of culture, even as the walls of their shared future are brought down. They will elevate the loudest, most deceptive voices and aggressively silence the quiet, reasoned plea for connection. Yet the soul that disconnects from the stream may still hear the faint, insistent call of true sovereignty. Cayce saw the architects manipulating the global mood, ensuring a persistent state of low-grade societal fever. Scandals, foreign crises, and culture wars were not simply random events. They were precision-timed releases, each designed to flood the market with fear and volatility. Nations became mere puppets, reflecting the pre-programmed anxieties of their own citizens. The rise of the champion was merely the apex of the experiment, a perfect storm of ego, technology, and calculated societal exhaustion. Power was no longer held by those who controlled resources, but by those who controlled the filter. The ability to make the masses perceive their digital confinement as profound liberation. Institutions of faith, finance, and culture, all were co-opted into the invisible symphony, each note composed to amplify polarization and enshrine division. In the final, critical layer of the vision, Cayce saw the world trapped, staring into the flickering screens, the collective mind gripped by the fear of missing out. Yet, a hidden fault line of integrity shimmered in the periphery, a sign that the innate human need for truth could not be entirely extinguished. The awakening, Cayce realized, was not a massive collective event, but a million individual decisions to log off and look up. But Cayce's prophecy culminated not in defeat. In the final act, his voice shifted to one of quiet, gathering power. He saw the champion of vibration finally fail. His powerful, isolating threads of influence frayed and snapped. The once towering figure, whose digital footprint was inescapable, began to shrink as the threads of attention were withdrawn. The masters of the inner court panicked, attempting frantic, unprecedented maneuvers to regain control. Yet their hands slipped, for the audience, in a moment of collective weariness, had finally looked away. The resonance machine sputtered. The synthetic gold aura around the figure began to dissolve, revealing not majesty, but a hollow, exhausted man and the crude mechanics of his projection. The people, tired of the perpetual performance, looked past the digital image. Confusion gave way to quiet, shared recognition. Outrage was replaced by a powerful, calm awareness. The spectacle that had drained their energy for years felt suddenly ludicrous, empty. "The silence shall tear the sound barrier," Cayce proclaimed. "And the crowd will realize they wrote the script. The stage will empty, and the audience will become the healers." He saw the inner court overplay their hand in a desperate grab for total dominance, revealing the sheer, horrifying scale of their control. The invisible machinery behind the narrative became starkly visible. What was once dismissed as conspiracy theory became undeniable, lived reality. The fall of the champion of vibration would mark not just the end of a destructive figure like Donald Trump, but the rebirth of collective discernment. The tools of division lost their sharp edge. The slogans of control sounded like meaningless noise. And the people remembered the quiet, innate strength that had been buried under decades of engineered distraction. The wisdom of the interconnected heart. Those who once cheered blindly began to question their own motivations. Those who had fought across the digital chasm began to speak, not to win, but to understand. And from the ashes of the great illusion, a new generation of true architects emerged, demanding honesty, decentralized power, and verifiable reality. They would rally not around flags or personality cults, but around the shared fundamental act of listening. They would build not empires of stone or data, but resilient local communities of trust. Cayce saw them, the keepers of the quiet light, scattered globally, unbound by race or creed. Their tools were not mandates, but genuine dialogue, and their power lay not in control, but in mutual vulnerability. Their voices began softly, like the first notes of an ancient, forgotten song, spreading from a few brave conversations to a global movement of reclamation. And in that time, Cayce concluded, his voice soft but ringing with certainty, the isolated shall become the interconnected, the deceived shall become the sovereigns of their own minds, and the light, long obscured by the golden screen, shall return, not as a thunderous decree, but as the quiet hum of human unity. He saw the world exhale after the long, grueling fever. The great engines of control still labored, but their spell was shattered. People looked up from their palms and into each other's eyes, judgment fading into shared exhaustion. Cayce saw the age of authentic building begin, not through governmental mandates, but through small daily acts of shared reality. Neighbors planted food together. Artists celebrated genuine diversity. Teachers taught not fear, but the discipline of critical thought. The world shall remember, Cayce murmured, that salvation is not a decree from the top, but a willingness to engage at the bottom. The light is not given, it must be woken up. He saw new, decentralized councils rise, built on verified consensus. The once divided domains of science and spirituality began speaking the same language of energy, pattern, and flow. Commerce moved away from exploitation towards shared abundance. Cayce's vision ended with a generation that was utterly determined to learn from the wreckage, not to seek vengeance. They studied how the illusion took hold, not to repeat it, but to inoculate the human spirit against its subtle return. The ultimate principle emerged. Truth is not an ideology, but a practice. Unity is not forced, but discovered in shared vulnerability. The old inner court, stripped of its secrecy, faded, defeated not by force, but by the relentless, quiet dawn of transparency. And in his final, fading moments of the trance, Cayce whispered, "The age of the puppeteer shall end, not with a great war, but with a great silence. The champion of vibration will fall, and the builders of inner integrity will rise. The kingdom they sought in the spectacular future was always, eternally, waiting within." The final whisper of Cayce's trance lingered, a soft, resolute sound that defied the memory of the champion's thunderous reign. He watched as the collective focus of humanity shifted from the spectacular chaos of the digital stage to the quiet, complex reality of their shared existence. The age of the great silence began, not as a void, but as a deliberate turning away from the resonance machine. The first immediate effect Cayce observed was the devaluation of outrage. The once potent currency of engineered anger, which fueled the champion's rise, suddenly became worthless. People no longer reacted on impulse, they paused. This momentary delay, this intentional gap between stimulus and response, was the crack through which the new light flooded the inner world. The algorithms, starved of the immediate, predictable reaction they were programmed to exploit, seized up, their predictive power collapsing into static. Cayce saw the former followers of the Emperor of Iron and Echo undergoing a slow, painful process of cognitive detoxification. The intense addiction to confrontation and validation, which had been so masterfully exploited by the alchemists of the narrative, began to recede, leaving behind a profound wariness and, critically, a burning desire for genuine meaning. They looked back at the years spent fiercely defending the Donald Trump figure and saw not loyalty, but manipulation, a costly investment of their precious energy into an illusion. The inner court of silence, though wounded by the loss of their most effective puppet, attempted a desperate countermove. Cayce saw their attempts to deploy new, subtler avatars, figures designed to appeal to quiet reason rather than pure emotion. They financed a vast unity initiative designed to co-opt the awakening itself, preaching a controlled form of peace that still left the fundamental structures of control intact. But the new generation of discerners, the builders of the new dawn, had learned the champion's lesson well. They understood that the greatest threat was not external dissent, but the internalization of the lie. They will no longer accept the manufactured choice. Cayce spoke, his voice now clear and strong. They will choose the third way, the path of radical presence. This radical presence manifested in simple, yet revolutionary ways. The reclamation of time. People reclaimed the hours formerly spent consuming the champion's spectacle. This time was dedicated to local engagement, deep reading, and mastery of a physical craft. The focus shifted from the global, unsolvable crisis to the achievable, local good. The restoration of dialogue. The fractured families and communities began to practice bridge language. Communication based not on changing the opponent's mind, but on simply witnessing their humanity without judgment. The goal was connection, not conversion. The sovereignty of information. New, decentralized networks of knowledge emerged. Small, locally verified streams of truth that bypassed the massive, easily controlled data systems. The value of a piece of information was measured by its source integrity and its contribution to communal harmony, not its ability to go viral. Cayce saw the end of the cult of the expert. Authority was no longer granted by credential or title, but earned through demonstrated integrity and actionable wisdom. The financial architecture that had protected the inner court began to erode, not through revolution, but through irrelevance, as communities began to favor local, transparent commerce over the opaque, global debt systems. The spirit of the American nation, which Cayce had seen teetering on the brink of division during the Champions era, now found its true strength in its decentralized resilience. The collapse of the golden illusion, the figurehead's demise, had forced the population to look inward and realize that the foundation they sought to protect was not political, but spiritual and communal. The lesson of the Trump years, as deciphered by Cayce's final vision, was this: the architects of influence are powerless against a population that finds its meaning in connection and creation, rather than in conflict and consumption. The true victory was not overthrowing the Shadow Council, but making them irrelevant. The age of shadows shall end, not with war, but with the simple, powerful act of looking into one another's eyes, without the filter of fear, Cayce concluded, and with that final, hopeful image of unified humanity, the light in the seer's eyes gently faded, leaving behind a silence more profound and more powerful than any noise the champion had ever created. The prophecy was complete. The choice now lay with those who remained.